I was sitting on my usual stool, staring at my half-full glass, when the noise reached a new crescendo. Another group of happy partygoers had apparently entered the bar. Damn, I hate this time of year! I'm sorry, I'm not sure I heard you correctly. Did you say you hate Christmas? A voice next to me asked. Damn, I must have spoken my thoughts out loud and I hadn't meant to do that. But it was what I was thinking. Yes. What is everyone so damn happy about? Disturbing my peace, that's what, I replied, not looking at whoever was addressing me. Well, come now, my friend, that's not exactly what you should be doing. It's Christmas, you know. A time of happiness and goodwill for all people. They're all just trying to have fun, commented the voice next to me. When I turned around, I saw a short but rather tall old man with white hair and a false beard sitting on the bar stool next to me. To be honest, he looked like one of those store Santa Clauses who stopped for a drink on the way home from work. Where the hell did he come from? I thought to myself. I don't remember noticing him. With the crush at the Rose and Crown that night, the Queen of Blood could have walked in and no one would have seen her. Look, my friend, I come into this pub almost every night for a quiet drink and to drown my sorrows. Maybe I have a little chat with George the barman or a couple of my friends. None of us have anything to be particularly happy about. We all live alone, with our own demons, and frankly, we prefer the bar to be alone. We don't like having all those idiots running around wishing everyone a bloody Christmas. I frowned in the old man's direction. We all have our problems in life, my friend, but you should try to relax once in a while. Now is the time to forget your problems and be happy. The old geezer smiled back at me. Why do people think they can understand your problems without knowing anything about you? I was annoyed with that old man. You just tell me why the hell I should be happy? I frowned back. That cocky old bastard was getting on my nerves, so I decided to tell him everything in order. Once he heard my goddamn story, he'd realize I had nothing to be happy about. Listen, 3 bleeding years ago, after years of what I thought was a happy marriage, I came home from work sick and found my so-called loving wife sleeping with her boss in my bed. I heartily kicked my arse, and then the bitch got up and ran off with the prick. He had a lot more money than I did. And when it came to divorce court, the bitch got custody of not only my 3 kids, but my dog as well. What did the damn bitch do then? I'll tell you. She made it very difficult for me to have access to the kids for the next 18 months. I was running around the courts like a goddamn yo-yo trying to get those bastards to make her give me the access to the kids I should have had. These damn family courts don't give a crap about fathers. And then the CSA, Child Support Agency, those bastards came down on me like a ton of bleeding bricks. The bastards took most of my freaking wages as child support for the next goddamned year or so. Those goddamn bastards were taking my paycheck from my goddamn employer before I even saw it. So I couldn't afford to buy the kids many Christmas presents that year. I wouldn't mind if the cow and her freaking stallion needed the damn money. But the asshole she lives with owns the company she worked for. He makes more in a week than I do in a year. You know what those bastards did that Christmas? Well, I'll bloody well tell you, they opened my presents to the kids before Christmas. Then those bastards went and got more expensive versions of what I brought the kids and gave them to the kids first. And at Christmas, they wouldn't let me anywhere near the kids. The next time I saw my kids, my gifts were forgotten and the kids were playing with the more expensive toys. I see you have a vindictive ex-wife. But remember, my friend, when they grow up, your children will realize that you love them. Here's something they'll never be able to do, Mr. Last Christmas bitch, and that git took the kids on vacation. They went skiing in France. But one night they went out and this asshole got drunk as hell. On the way back to the hotel, the bastard threw his bleeding merc into the lake. Oh, he made sure he and the whore got out of the car. But my kids were still buckled in their car seats when the car was pulled out of the goddamn lake the next morning. That bastard killed my kids. Now you see why I don't like Christmas. It brings me no joy, only bad memories. My friend, I'm sorry you've had such a bad couple of years, but you should try to move on with your life. You should really try to forget and start a new life. Just try to remember the good times you had with your children. Honestly, there were no good times. Once they moved in with that asshole, they got everything they wanted. The kids didn't want to know me anymore. They were spoiled to death. I only saw them once a damn month. They just forgot me. The old man was still smiling at me. I was tempted to tell him to piss off and leave me alone. But there were so many people in the pub that he couldn't have moved away from me even if he'd wanted to. "What you have told me is very hurtful to hear," he continued. "But you must have had good times before your wife left home. And now, of course, you must accept the fact that your old life is gone. Perhaps you should try to build a new one." The old man and I sat at the bar and talked until closing time. Toward the end of the conversation, I started to warm up to him a little. I think he really cared about me and was trying to convince me to forget the past and look forward to the future. He left the pub a little before I did, and I watched him make his way somewhat uncertainly towards the exit. When he left, I finished my pint, said goodnight to George, and started on my way home. I don't know if I was lucky or unlucky not to have a car that night. Lucky that I couldn't drive home in the intoxicated state I was in because I could have hit someone and killed them. But I was unlucky because I couldn't drive into a tree and kill myself, which I really wanted to do. Stepping outside the pub, I found the old man leaning against the wall. No doubt he had drunk far more alcohol than he could handle. Shit, I thought, I can't leave the old bastard here. If it gets any colder, he might freeze to death. "Come on, Daddy, where do you live?" "I guess I'll have to walk you home." "That's very nice of you, Graham." I'm feeling a little insecure. "I'll be all right once I've been out in the fresh air for a while." I didn't pay any attention to it then. But this old man knew my name. I never could figure it out. Maybe he heard George say it. We headed in the direction of his house. To my relief, it wasn't too far out of my way. The old man leaned against me and chatted about life. I have to admit I wasn't really listening, so I didn't memorize a word of what he was saying. I just wanted to drive him home and then go back to my bed. Suddenly, the old man stood up straight, as if he wasn't drunk anymore. "Fire!" he shouted. A little confused, I looked in the direction he was pointing. Through the smoke-blackened windows of the neighboring house, I could see a Christmas tree engulfed in flames. Then, with an almighty explosion, the picture window flew outward. The next second, the whole room was a roaring inferno, and flames engulfed the front of the building. "A woman and 3 children live in this house," said the old man. Suddenly, I was as sober as a judge. I pulled my cell phone out of my pocket and, unlocking the keypad, handed it to the old man. "Call the fire department," I ordered him, running toward the house. They say that people do brave things because they don't think about the consequences of their actions. I have to tell you that as I rushed to the front door, I knew there was a good chance I wouldn't see the morning, and deep down I didn't care. I felt the heat of the flames from the neighboring window as I approached the door, which, to my surprise, yielded with a thud. Clouds of black smoke enveloped me as I staggered inside, barely able to keep my balance. At this time of day, I figured that anyone left alive in the house was probably upstairs in the bedrooms. Most of these 2-family houses have a similar layout, and I had no trouble finding the stairs. Climbing the stairs 2 at a time, I rushed upstairs trying to yell about the fire at the same time, but the smoke was choking me and I couldn't speak. At the top of the stairs, I found the door to a room directly above the hearth of the fire, and the first thing I did was go there. Inside the room, I groped all around, surprisingly much smoke, until I discovered the inanimate forms of 2 small children lying in their beds. I picked them both up in my arms, and the next thing I knew, I was coming out of the smoke by the front door. There was some young guy standing there, and I literally threw the 2 little girls at him. After taking a few deep breaths of clean air to regain my composure, I turned around and went back into the smoke. This time I could see that the flames were beginning to reach the door of the room where the fire had been. When I reached the top of the stairs, there was a whooshing noise. The flames had engulfed the door, and the fire was spilling out into the hallway. Through the smoke, I looked back at the stairs. My mind told me that I was not going back out the way I had come in. This time I chose the back bedroom. Inside, I found a woman who had apparently also been covered in smoke. I'm not a very big guy, and I can't tell you how I managed to lift her up. One look out the back window told me that I wasn't getting out that way. Flames were shooting out of the window below. There must have been a see-through living room downstairs. It's strange that such thoughts come to mind. Returning to the landing, I headed for the other front bedroom. Swinging the door open, I was relieved to see blue lights flashing in the window. Throwing the woman on the bed, incidentally on top of her son, who was sleeping there as well, I grabbed the TV from the bracket on the wall and threw it at the window, hoping no one was downstairs, then knocked out the rest of the glass as best I could. I grabbed the boy first and, leaning out of the broken window, threw him into the arms of the fireman who was waiting below. The woman soon followed. She was in no condition to object. When I looked back, I saw that the flames had already engulfed the room with me, and I rushed headlong after her. Luckily, the fire department was waiting for me. I wondered if they were trained to have people suddenly rush at them. They had done a damn good job of catching us all. The firefighters put one of the breathing apparatus on me to help me clear the smoke from my lungs. I sat on the sidewalk and slowly came to my senses while the firefighters fought the fire. I watched the ambulance crew tending to the mother and the boy. I didn't see the two girls, but there were several ambulances here by then, so they were probably in one of them. My head was throbbing, probably because of the smoke and also because of the booze I had consumed that night. People kept coming up and congratulating me, telling me I was a hero. Hell, I didn't want or need that. Soon the police arrived and started pulling everyone back, away from the fire. I took that chance and stood up and quietly disappeared into the crowd. I chatted with them for a while and then hurried away. When I got home, I took a long shower to get rid of the smoke smell. I thought I would have to take my clothes to the cleaners because they smelled like smoke, but then I found the burn marks on them and threw them all away. By the time I finally crawled into bed, it was past 2. The next morning, Christmas Eve, I crawled out of bed around 10 with the worst hangover I'd ever had in my life. I think it was half from the beer and half from the smoke. I was in the kitchen drinking coffee with aspirin when I heard my cell phone ring. I found it on the dining room table and answered it. "Hello, is this Graham Stark?" asked an unfamiliar female voice. "Yes." "What's the problem?" I was back in my old pathetic bore mode. Admittedly, that's how I used to talk to people. It kind of alienated them from me, and that's how I got used to it. "Oh, Mr. Stark, I just wanted to thank you for saving me and my children last night." "Who's that?" "I'm Sheila Monroe. It was me and my children you pulled out of the fire last night. I just wanted to thank you. We would have died if you hadn't saved us." "I'm afraid I haven't the slightest idea what you're talking about, lady." Denial, I thought, was the best way to keep a low profile. "He said you would say that." "But I know it was you who saved our lives by pulling us out of the fire last night. So don't try to deny it, or I'll tell the papers who you are. And from what your friend told me, you wouldn't want that. The press is going crazy trying to find you, you know that?" "Okay, it was me, but you're welcome." "I didn't think about it, I just did it." "You really don't need to thank me," I told her and then immediately thought about it. "By the way, how did you know where to find me?" "Oh, your friend, a nice elderly gentleman came by the other day. He said he was a friend of yours. He told me who you were and gave me your number. Would you like to talk to him?" "Yes, it is. I have a lot to talk to him about. He left with my cell phone last..." I stopped talking. What the hell was I talking about? I was talking to Sheila Monroe on my goddamn cell phone. But last night I gave it to the old bastard to call the fire brigade, and after I walked out of the burning house, I never saw the old man again. How the hell did I get my phone back? How the hell did he get my name? Oh, I think he's gone. I don't see him anywhere. Don't let it bother you. I think he has a habit of disappearing, I said to myself. Mr. Stark, I realize this is a bit of an overhead on Christmas Eve, but is there any chance you could stop by the hospital today? I would really like for me and my children to have a chance to meet and thank you in person. We won't tell anyone who you are if that's what you want. Damn and blast, she asked so sweetly. How the hell could I say no? If you insist. But just knowing you're safe and healthy is already thanks enough for me. What a hypocrite I was. I didn't give a damn about her or her children. And I couldn't understand why I'd run into a burning house last night, except in an unconscious attempt to kill myself. But I agreed to visit her a little later. It was probably around 30 when I found her in the hospital. Sheila Monroe was wearing the strangest collection of clothes I'd ever seen. Well, I hadn't given them time to get dressed the night before, had I? Sheila realized who I was as soon as I entered the room. Oh, Graham, it's so good of you to come, she said, as she put her arms around my neck and then started talking to me like I was an old family friend. There were 2 other people in the room and they asked if I was her husband. She told them, no, Graham is just a special friend. The couple left us alone, and then Sheila apologized for her behavior, saying that the other people were reporters, and she thought they might wonder who I was. I thanked her, and then she took me to meet her children. I was amazed that they all seemed to recognize me. The meeting, while friendly and a little overwhelming to me, was a little tense. Let's face it, I didn't know this family and I found their gratitude very awkward. It was awkward for me too because they reminded me of what I had lost. The kids were about the same age as mine. Well, maybe a little younger. I really wanted to bow out and leave. I really shouldn't have gone there. The older of the two girls, Miranda, who was about 8 years old, clung to my left arm and hung on until she died. Then the boy, Jacob, I'd say a year or so younger, came over and clung to my right arm and wouldn't let go. Little Yvette must have felt left out, but she solved the problem by climbing into my lap and wrapping her arms around my neck. I really didn't know what to say to them. I saw the big bruise on Miranda's face and remembered the bump on her shoulder when I'd picked her up the night before. But she had never mentioned it. I had only been there for a short time when a woman from social services came in. She asked Sheila if she had any relatives or friends they could stay with, but she had none. The woman then told Sheila that she would put her and the children up in a local boarding house. I knew what a dump she said they would be living in, and I felt sorry for them. I knew the place. It was a real hellhole, full of asylum seekers and illegals awaiting deportation. I don't know why I said it, but I suddenly heard myself telling Sheila that she and her kids could come and stay with me for a while. I had a room, I know, but why I invited them to stay, I just don't know. Then I was very surprised to hear that Sheila had accepted my offer. It was all very strange if you think about it. You may have guessed that it was completely out of my character to even suggest it. In retrospect, it was quite strange for Sheila to accept an offer of lodging from a man who was a complete stranger to her. The day got even weirder when all four of us climbed into my car and drove home. I suddenly realized that they didn't have anything to eat at the house, so we stopped by the supermarket and did some shopping in between. We ended up with 4 carts. Well, Christmas shopping for 5 of us. As we stood at the checkout counter, I looked around at my guests and realized they had almost no clothes either. So from the supermarket, we went to the clothing store next door, where my credit card was further damaged, although Sheila assured me that I would be reimbursed, which I eventually was. When we got to my house, I showed them where they could settle in. It was rather painful to see these children settling in my children's old rooms. I told Sheila that she would take my bed and I would use the cot in my study downstairs. That way she would be close to the kids and I would be on the other floor. I figured that way there would be no compromising situations. Come on, there are some really weird guys these days. Sheila didn't recognize me as Adam. I had my back. To the kids' disappointment, my house wasn't decorated for the season, so I dug out the artificial tree and a box of Christmas ornaments. Then the kids and I set about changing everything with frenzy. I did the usual and spent God knows how long getting the Christmas lights to work. Why is it that the last time you put them away, they worked just fine, but when you take them out again, you have to check almost every bulb before it turns on? Sheila was still facing the problem of Christmas presents for the children. I solved it by digging out the gifts I had brought my children last year that they had not had time to receive. I put them away in the closet and tried to forget about them. It pained me to do it, but having done it, I was glad I did. Sheila's children were about the same age as mine. Christmas morning was a pleasant one for me. It was the best Christmas day I've had in years. I had a strange feeling watching the kids open presents. Look, I won't talk about it, it's too painful. Sheila started cooking Christmas dinner while I played with the kids. About 12 o'clock, some man from Sheila's insurance company arrived. He was a loss adjuster and came to tell Sheila that she had nothing to worry about. The company would arrange for repairs to the house and let her know when and where to choose replacement furniture and carpets. Jesus, they're on a roll, said I to Sheila as he walked away. You're not kidding. I haven't even told them about the fire yet, she replied. I wonder how they knew where to find me. We were never able to resolve the problem. Later, when we inquired, the insurance company said they received a call on Christmas Eve, informing them of the fire and stating a claim on Sheila's behalf. Oddly, their records show that the call was made in the morning, long before I went to the hospital to meet Sheila and invited her and her children to come stay with me. That Christmas was a good one for me. Yes, I kissed Sheila under the mistletoe, but it was a very respectful kiss, and we only did it because the kids insisted. When the house was filled with children again, the neighbors soon took notice. More specifically, the neighbors' kids. I looked out of the kitchen window on Boxing Day and noticed a few of them in the garden playing with Sheila's children. Suddenly, people who had avoided my gaze for the past few years began to smile and wave enthusiastically at the sight of me. They also started stopping me in the street to chat. I thought we were just starting to settle into our new place when New Year's Eve arrived. There was a knock on the door at midnight. Half a dozen neighbors came in waving liquor bottles. And before anyone knew what was happening, the impromptu party had begun. Before my wife left me, it was a regular New Year's Eve event. I think the neighbors stayed away from me for the next couple of years as I turned into a murderer. Now they seemed intent on making up for lost time. I won't go into details because, frankly, I don't remember much about that night. Until I realized that all the neighbors had gone home, and Sheila and I, who'd had a lot more to drink than we should have, were making out on the couch. It wasn't a big deal, but I suddenly realized that I had one hand on Sheila's chest and the other on her leg under the hem of her dress. I don't know where my thoughts were or what I thought I was doing, but I suddenly realized that this was not the right thing to do. Sheila is a very pretty woman. I don't think many men would want to kick her out of bed. But there's nothing special about me. So I wondered why she let me do what I did. I didn't want her to sleep with me just because she felt obligated to. She was grateful to me for saving her and the children's lives and giving them a place to live. So I quickly cut our meeting short. Sheila seemed a little surprised that I had interrupted the meeting. She looked embarrassed and remained silent for a while, then quickly retreated to her room. We never discussed what had happened that evening again, and after that evening we never came close to intimacy again. Although in the months that followed, I believe we became very close friends. But it was a very strange situation where we both went out of our way to never have bodily contact with each other. You know how it is, going around the other side of the room instead of pushing through to each other. I became Uncle Ray to the children because little Yvette had trouble pronouncing the name Graham for some reason. When Yvette said the word, I sounded like Ray or something close to it, and the other two children soon started calling me Uncle Ray too. For simplicity's sake and to avoid confusing the kids, Sheila started calling me Ray too. Over the next few months, the neighborhood kids started calling me Uncle Ray too. And before I knew where I was, Ray was my new name. During those months, I spent a lot of time with my children. When you have children in your house, you take them for granted. Or rather, I took them that way with my own children. When they are suddenly no longer there, you certainly miss them and all the things you had to do with them. Having Sheila's children in the house was like a second chance for me, although I think some evenings I fell into melancholy, wondering if I had been as good a father as I could have been to my own children. In time, I learned that Sheila's husband had committed suicide. Apparently, his business had gone under and he just couldn't handle it. He had a nervous breakdown, turned into a depressed person, and eventually killed himself. I didn't find out about it all at once and not all from Sheila. Rather, I had to figure it out on my own, picking up bits and pieces here and there. The work on Sheila's house started fairly quickly, but we were told right away that it would take quite a while. The heat was so intense that much of the structure of the house was damaged and had to be almost completely rebuilt. Even the residents of the other half of the house had to move out for a while they rebuilt the wall. All 5 of us traveled to the house every week to see how the work was progressing. To outsiders, life in my house looked quite normal. To those who didn't know us, Sheila and I looked like husband and wife living together with our 3 children. But it wasn't. There wasn't the closeness that a husband and wife usually share. For the first few months, Sheila and I left the house only to go shopping, to the cemetery. Sheila's husband is buried in the same cemetery as my children, and to her house to see how far the builders had progressed with the renovations. As time went on, I was dragged, voluntarily, to the kids' school activities. I became very involved in Jacob and Miranda's extracurricular activities. The reaction of the teachers was interesting. Some of them had taught my own children and obviously knew about their deaths. I know that one of them stumbled once when, in referring to Miranda, he called her by my daughter's name. He was very embarrassed when Miranda corrected him. I mention this because I have never made that mistake. Although sometimes in my dreams the children were not that confused, but kind of blended into each other. As my relationship with my children grew closer and closer, my relationship with Sheila remained the same. We sort of kept each other at a distance. Although I often watched her out of the corner of my eye in the evenings, she was an attractive woman, and sometimes I thought she was watching me. In the summer, I took them all camping in Wales. It was something Sheila and the children had not done before. I let them use a frame tent, and I used my old camping tent. Once they got the hang of it, living without all the modern conveniences takes some getting used to. They really enjoyed it, and we spent a couple more weekends for the rest of the summer. At the end of the summer, we, or rather Sheila, were choosing paint colors, furniture, flooring, and other things for her house. I drove her around the house, as I'd done since she'd moved in, and she often asked my advice, not that I claimed to be an expert. In October, the house was nearing completion, and the plan was to move in during the last week of the month. But because of problems with the central heating system, the move was postponed until the beginning of November. And then quite unexpectedly, I found myself in an empty house again. I knew this day would come, but that first evening when I came home from work to an empty house was a real killer for me. I looked around and immediately went outside. I knew my destination was the Rose and Crown, and as I walked up the street, I began to wonder if someone had stolen my usual bar stool. I hadn't gone near the place since the previous Christmas. Although I was on my way to the Rose and Crown, I somehow, without thinking or planning, drove past Sheila's house. Through the window, I could see the kids sat down to eat and Sheila standing there talking to someone on the phone. It occurred to me to walk up the path and knock on the door, but somehow I couldn't bring myself to do it. My stool was empty and George said, "Hello, Graham," and started pulling my pint as if I'd been here yesterday. "Ray," I remember saying to him. "Everyone calls me Ray now." "I don't care, Ray," replied George and continued to serve me. I drank too much that night, which I realized as soon as I woke up in my bed the next morning. It was the hangover, more than anything else, that made me decide that I wasn't going to go back to my old way of life. Well, that was my intention, but the world is full of good intentions, isn't it? I spent the next 2 nights in the garage. I had the idea of turning it into a workshop. I was going to have a hobby like woodworking or something like that. Then I would have small projects to do in the evenings and on weekends. The next night, my neighbor invited me over for dinner. I'll be honest, he was fiddling with his wife's car when I got home, and desperate to find something to do, I went to him to offer to help. As a thank you, his wife asked me to stay for dinner. I can't say I understood what was going on for the next week or so. But several neighbors asked me to join them for an evening meal. Now looking back, I realized that it was all planned. Just by chance, a husband or wife would happen to be outside when I came home from work, and they would start chatting. The next moment, I was sitting at the table with them. Often we talked about Sheila and the children. But all I could say was that I hadn't seen them since they moved away. This usually resulted in strange expressions on the wives' faces and awkward silences from the husbands. I think the second or third weekend after Sheila went home, I ran into her and the kids at the supermarket. I'll be honest, I didn't bump into them. The kids bumped into me, and everyone in the damn store knew it. Before I realized what was going on, Yvette was already sitting in my shopping cart with the other 2 hanging on my arms. Luckily, the kids turned out to be very perky, as Sheila and I didn't seem to know what to say to each other. I took them to McDonald's for ice cream after Sheila and I finished shopping. While the kids played, Sheila told me about the problems with the house. Nothing serious, just what you would expect. Something made me invite them all over for dinner that night. For a moment, I thought Sheila hesitated, but the children made the decision for her. But let's be fair, Sheila was cooking the meal. Maybe that's why she hesitated. Sheila had already tasted my cooking. It was fun to have the kids over after dinner, although most of the time they played with the neighborhood kids. I helped, or hindered, she never said which, Sheila in the kitchen, and we seemed to get along as well as we had while she was staying with me. That was until she asked me to call the kids into the house and wash them. Unfortunately, we both tried to cross the kitchen at the same time and collided near the back door. Sheila lost her balance and I grabbed her so she wouldn't fall. I held her in a hug for a moment, then we both repeated, "I'm sorry" to each other, and then we untangled ourselves and retreated embarrassedly to our sinks. In the evening we had dinner, listening to the excited kids tell us about their day with their friends. After I finished the dishes, I drove the family home. There was talk of them coming again and that I was going to have dinner with them. But the actual date was never set. That night my car was left in the parking lot of the Rose and Crown. I was too drunk to drive her home. On Sunday, after I'd recovered from my drink, I went back to the pub to pick her up and she spent another night there. Look, I just didn't want to go back to that empty house until I had to. Or I was so drunk I didn't notice the silence. Monday morning I didn't go to work. I went to the real estate agent to put my house on the market. I had no idea where I was going to live, but I knew I couldn't live in that empty house anymore. Losing one family was bad enough, but losing a second family was too much for me. I moved out of the house, although I left it furnished until the sale. The agents told me that a house is easier to sell if it is furnished. I checked into a small residential hotel near where I was working. It was quite nice there, but I can't say I made many friends among the other guests. Since then, I was back to being the miserable old fart I was a year ago. I received summonses in the mail requiring me to attend Sheila's children's Christmas plays and concerts at their school. I sat with Sheila at all of these events, and I was a little uncomfortable as the seats were pretty tightly packed. Physical contact between Sheila and me was almost impossible to avoid. I knew Sheila didn't like it because I could feel her tense up when I made contact with her. There was again a discussion about going to their house for dinner one evening, but again I somehow failed to set a firm date. The kids asked me if I was going to join them for Christmas, and I know they were upset when I told them that unfortunately I had other plans. I spouted some nonsense to them about going to visit my sister on the South Coast. I'm not sure Sheila bought the story, but I think the kids believed it. I spent a lot of time choosing Christmas presents for Sheila and her children, and arranged with a local courier company to have them delivered to her home on Christmas Day. Expensive, but I thought it was worth the surprise. On Christmas Eve, I was drawn back to the Rose and Crown. Strangely, the place wasn't as crowded as it had been the year before. Must be a different night of the week. It must have been about 10 o'clock when suddenly a voice asked, "Are you happier this year, Ray?" I turned around and saw an old man sitting on a stool next to me. "Oh, it's you again. Where did you come from?" I asked, surprised. I hadn't noticed him enter the pub, nor had I bought the drink he was holding from George. But perhaps I was in my own little world again. "I'm always around, Ray. You just can't see me." Jesus, I thought the old man had had too much to drink already. "What'll you have?" I asked, signaling George to fill my glass. But the old man just waved his hand, signaling that he didn't want more at the moment. George came over with my new pint and stood for a while with a strange expression on his face. "It's on me, Ray, and I think you should make this your last one for the day," he said, waving away my outstretched five. I can't say I was particularly following what George was saying, as I had a few questions for the old man. "Listen, where did you go the night of the fire?" I asked him. "When I left the house, you were nowhere to be seen." "I've been busy, Ray. Before I passed, The old man was silent for a few seconds, as if contemplating what to say. "Before I retired, I was a pediatrician. I was in the ambulance, helping paramedics with kids. When I got out, you were gone. But my phone, how did you get it back to me?" "I gave it to the policeman. You know you didn't look too good when you left that house. He must have given it to you or put it in his pocket. I have to admit that was how I was able to get the phone back. I couldn't remember exactly what happened or what was said when the policeman came up and asked everyone to move away from the fire." "You ended up in the hospital the next day," I said, still trying to understand this old man and his actions. "Of course you did. I wanted to see how the kids were recovering. You know, the timing on the night of the fire was very good. A couple more minutes and it would have been a disaster. But you gave Sheila my phone number. How did you know it or my name?" "From your cell phone, Ray. Your name and number are on the sticker on the back. It was a fact I was using a company cell phone, and since they're all the same, we labeled them to identify whose it is when they're lying around the office." As I drank my pint, I kept asking the old man questions, to which he gave reasonable answers. But something about him didn't add up. "So, Ray, are you going to spend Christmas with Sheila and the kids?" he asked suddenly. "No, I don't think that's a good idea," I replied. "And why not?" he asked in a shocked tone. Because of what?" "Come out with it. Those kids are going to miss you." "Because of Sheila." I glanced around to see if anyone was within earshot. George was serving another customer at the far end of the bar, but no one else was standing close. I think I've fallen in love with her. And that's a good reason not to spend Christmas with her. I think it's a damn good reason to spend time with her and her family. But she doesn't feel the same way about me. What the hell gave you that idea? Well, I did something really stupid. Hell, I can't figure out why I'm telling you this. Perhaps you need it. "Now come out with it," the old man said. "New Year's Eve last year. She was only at my house for a couple days, and I'm ashamed to admit that I went a little overboard. I think I upset her." "Oh, and how did you get over the line?" "Well, I kissed her and, oh my God, I touched her inappropriately. Can we drop the subject?" "No, I don't think we can." "So what did she do to make you stop?" "Nothing. Look, I've had too much to drink. Why shouldn't I be surprised at that?" The old boy intervened. Well, anyway, I suddenly realized what I was doing and stopped. So Sheila didn't stop you? You stopped yourself? Yes! If she didn't stop you, why did you stop? Perhaps she wanted you to continue. And maybe she let me do it out of gratitude for saving her and her family's life. I don't want a woman sleeping with me out of gratitude. You didn't happen to discuss this with Sheila, did you? Don't be silly. That would be too embarrassing. It was already awkward for her to be in the house with me after that. Oh, it's such a shame she didn't remove herself and her children from your home. Well, she had nowhere to go. Bullshit! The insurance company paid you to house her and the kids, didn't they? Sheila could have moved out at any time. But why did she stay then? Think about it. Maybe she has fallen in love with her guardian angel, said the old boy, and then quietly added, What a pity it never happened to me. She never said anything to me. And I suppose you told her every day how you felt? Of course not. If I told Sheila how I felt, and she didn't feel the same way about me, well, it would be too embarrassing for her to stay living in my house. You don't think there's the slightest chance that Sheila thought exactly the same way? Do you, Ray? But! Tell me, why don't you accept her invitations to dinner? How do you know I didn't do it? And how do you know she asked me? Let's just say it's obvious to me, okay? But you're really making a mistake. This woman has fallen in love with you. Suddenly, the doors of the pub opened and a huge crowd of customers rushed in. Conversation became impossible, and for a few minutes I took my eyes off the old man. When things quieted down a little, I was surprised to find that he was no longer sitting on the stool beside me. George, where did the old boy go? I asked as he came over to refill my glass. What's the old thing? The old fart I was talking to. Jesus, Ray, you've had enough for one night. You've been sitting there talking to yourself all night. Time for you to go home, I think. George took the pint from me again and poured it into the slop tray. Do you want me to call you a cab, Ray? He added. George, I think you'd better reduce the amount of sauce yourself, I told him, getting up from the stool. As soon as George thought you had had enough, I knew I wasn't going to get anything more from him that evening. On Christmas Eve, I woke up without a hangover. It was nice, but not as unexpected as if Sheila hadn't lived with me for a year. Before she and the kids moved in with me, hangovers had been the norm for me. Like many people, I had a day off work and I spent it hanging around the stores. I had already bought presents for the children and Sheila, and they were to be delivered in the morning. But I found a few more things that I thought they might like. After wrapping them up, I took them to the courier's office to be added to the delivery. I then went back to the hotel with a couple of bottles of liquor that I felt should have robbed me of my senses for the rest of Boxing Day. In those days, pubs didn't stay open for long at Christmas. As I was leaving the dining room at the hotel that evening, one of the other guests, a guy everyone in the hotel knew as Major, called out to me. Mr. Stark, he asked, do you play bridge? Well, I have, but I'm not that smart about it, I replied without thinking, caught off guard by his question. Wonderful, you're just what we need. We don't take it too seriously ourselves. But Mrs. Brandt has visitors tonight. Could you make up the fourth installment until her visitors leave? You know I didn't know how to say no to that old bastard. Damn it, what is it about officers that they seem to be able to get you to do something without even trying? And here I was already sitting with 3 old farts playing goddamn bridge instead of going to the Rose and Crown. It's only until the old lady's guests leave anyway, I thought to myself. Some hopes were realized. The old lady never showed up, and at midnight we were still playing. The Major and the other 2 thanked me for my participation when the game was over, and they went to bed. By then they knew how bad I was at bridge, but they didn't comment. It was lucky we weren't playing for money, or I would have gone broke. When they left, I sat in the living room for a while and watched television. It was not until I was in bed that I realized that all I had drunk that night was a couple of glasses of sherry with the Major and his cronies. I wanted a pint or 2, but drinking beer at the bridge table didn't seem right. That Christmas morning I was up early for breakfast. God knows why, perhaps because I had not drunk anything the night before. But as I came down the stairs from my room, a surprise awaited me in the waiting room. Mr. Stark, there are packages for you! said the secretary as I came into view. I turned around quickly when she pointed to a small stack of brightly colored packages. Jesus, those were my gifts for Sheila and the kids. What the hell were they doing at the hotel? Assuming the couriers had screwed up the delivery, I called them to demand the packages be delivered to the correct address. But all I got was a recorded Christmas greeting and a message that the office would be open again the day after Boxing Day. You know, the old man who delivered them seemed a bit decrepit to me, commented the young receptionist, kindly ignoring the blasphemies I muttered as I hung up the phone. Don't tell me. A short, rather chubby guy with white hair and a beard, I said, looking at her. Yes, that sounds like him. Do you know him? She asked with a smile on her face. Unfortunately, I think so. Can you call me a cab and have them deliver them for me? Of course, Mr. Stark. Go have breakfast and I'll call you when the cab comes so you can pay him. The girl still hadn't called me when I left the dining room after my leisurely breakfast. I'm sorry, Mr. Stark. This doesn't make sense, but I've tried every cab service we normally use, and none of them have an available car. It may not make sense to you, but to me, young lady, when it comes to this old man, it's definitely starting to make sense. Would you mind helping me carry them to the car? When I pulled up to Sheila's house, the front door swung open, and all 3 children jumped out to greet me. I won't tell you how the day went, but I will say that even though I had said I wouldn't be there, my presence seemed to have been anticipated. I noticed that the dining room table was already set for 5. After the children had gone to bed, I asked Sheila, "Did you know I was coming?" "Of course." "But I said I wasn't coming." "Yes, that's true, but I saw your friend yesterday and he told me you would definitely come today." "Don't tell me, you little pot-bellied fellow." "Yes, the man who came to the hospital last year." "He didn't happen to say anything else, did he?" "Only that I should have locked the door after you came in and gotten your car keys." I looked at the coffee table where I had put my keys. They were gone! "Looking for them?" asked Sheila. She handed me the car keys. "Yes, can I have them, please?" "Sure. Just come and get them," Sheila replied, simultaneously pulling her dress off her chest and dropping her keys into her cleavage. Then she sat up and smiled at me. "What am I supposed to do now?" I asked. "Go and get them," said Sheila, jumping up from her seat and jogging toward the living room door. "You know where the bedroom is, don't you?" Sheila and I were married in less than a month. Well, you knew it was going to happen even if I didn't. But there's none so blind as those who don't want to see. We have lived happily in this house together for 13 years. This Christmas Eve. I am sitting here, next to my beloved wife, looking at an old burned photograph hanging over the fireplace. Just after our wedding, Sheila finally got back some photo albums that had been found in the burned house. They had been damaged by the water and the fire itself. The insurance company had sent them to specialists to see if any of them could be salvaged. "Sheila, who is pictured here?" I asked when we were looking through them for the first time. "My grandfather, my father's father." "I like this picture. Doesn't he remind you of Santa Claus?" "I thought he looked like an old man." "You know, the one you call my friend." "No, I don't think so. He's much shorter in stature than my grandfather. It's strange, but when I was younger, I think I remember him having a stern expression on his face. But now he's just so radiant. I guess memory deceives us. Life goes on.